Greetings to all who are joining us for this very special session as we kick off the Africa in the Moot Open Access Education and Training Series for the 33rd LL.M Vis International Commercial Arbitration Moot, always a mouthful, and the 23rd Vis East program. So as is our Africa in the Moot tradition, it's on me to say good evening, good afternoon, or good morning, depending on where you're tuning in from. My name is Erin Cronjé. I'm one of the directors of Africa in the Moot. And for those of you who are new to this series, Africa in the Moot is a non-profit, volunteer-based organization which supports sub-Saharan African teams to participate in the Vis Moot. And if you are tuning in, you will know well that the Vis Moot is the largest commercial moot court in the world and typically draws hundreds of university teams that participate. But historically, at least for the first 27 years of the Vis Moot, sub-Saharan African participation has been less than 1% of that. So knowing that immense talent is out there, we support teams with coaching, training, funding, and access to resources together with our partners so that they can best participate in the fantastic educational experience that is offered over the 8-month journey of the Vis Moot. And we are very, very proud to confirm that in just 4 years, during just 4 years of our existence, sub-Saharan African participation has increased significantly, both in participation during the Vis Moot journey with the written memos and so on, but also with in-person participation in Vienna. But now, aside from participation, the benefits of the incredible educational experience that is offered of the Vis Moot and the fostering of ideas and innovation that is afforded has led to our initiative and many of our fantastic community members going on to contribute to the arbitration promotion in Africa, but also the promotion of Africans in international arbitration on an even greater global scale. And you can read all about that in our season report, which will be published on our social media platforms today. But that is now looking at the past, and we want to look forward to what's ahead in our 5th year of operation. So this season, I'm also very proud to announce that we will be working together with 20 sub-Saharan African teams representing 15 jurisdictions, which is a new record for the Vis Moot. And we are also looking to build on our successes and innovate new products together with our global community, not least of which is hosting our 5th annual East Africa Pre-Moot, which is a one-of-a-kind event in Africa, well, one-of-a-kind event in the Vis Moot and certainly on the African continent. And it's the only pre-moot event that takes place in sub-Saharan Africa. So for this, we also need your help. I won't do it here, but if you are interested in supporting Africa in the Moot and its initiatives and in attending the pre-moot next year, which will be in February in Nairobi, please do reach out to us through our social media channels or through our email account. We will, of course, be posting about this online, so stay tuned. But speaking of the excellence of the Vis Moot and the benefit, we are honored to be opening this education series for the new season with one of our longtime cheerleaders and friends of Africa in the Moot and a true Vis Moot master, and that is Professor Stefan Kröll. And he, of course, is a man that probably needs no introduction, but we're going to do it anyway. And in addition to being one of the key creators of the Vis Moot problem that will occupy your minds and your waking hours for the next 6 months, maybe also your dreams, but I'll leave that to you. In his capacity as a director of the Vis Moot, he is also a professor and director of the Center for International Dispute Resolution at the Bucerius Law School. And he's chairman and on the board of directors at the DIS, and he is a very renowned arbitrator. But those are his highlights, and setting aside the technicalities and the procedural nuances and the interpretations of the CISG that will be coming for you again in your dreams or nightmares, I leave it to you. The purpose of today's session is really to learn more about Professor Kröll and the making of the 33rd Vis Moot. So for this discussion, he will be guided by also the excellent and my co-director, Pavan Swamy, who's the director of Africa in the Moot. And we will be digging in, but deeper into what brought this current moot problem into fruition and maybe going a little bit further back into the mind of Professor Stefan Kröll. And with that, I'm delighted very much to hand over to these two gentlemen. So over to you.
Thank you very much, Erin. A very, very big welcome to you, Professor Kröll, to the education series and back to Africa in the Moot program for this year. I thought that we could take a step back. I know that most of our viewers will be waiting and very keen to hear about the 33rd Vis Moot problem, but we're going to make them wait just a little, I think. And I thought we should go back to your very own law school days. The first question, what made you choose the study of law?
Law was always, since the 11th grade, on my agenda. And until the final grade, I wasn't 100% sure whether it should be law or history or science. So I had a number of interests, but in the end, it was law. And it's funny that it came from one of my classes in religion, where we had to basically defend as pupils there parties in the Good Samaritan, the history of the Bible there. And I had the impression that my client was severely punished without justification. And I thought I should do that, be able to do that better. And that was when I decided, okay, law might be something there. I can say that I never regretted that decision. While I find science still quite interesting, I think law was probably the correct study. Yeah.
And of course, those of us that have read or seen some of your problems throughout the years know that you often do go back to that science. So we might come back to that when we get to the writing of the problem. How were you as a student, Professor Kröll? What did you enjoy about the law? How did you find the study of the law?
To describe that, probably I was fairly curious as a student. I enjoyed most of the topics, but I was not very focused. So I did a little bit here, a little bit there. Also went beyond the law, did some macroeconomics, some computer issues, and I always did more lectures than necessary, but it was always very much at the surface. Looking backwards, I would probably dig a little bit deeper in the real important topics there. And that also went on through the LL.M program, where I had topics from a little bit here, a little bit there, and not very focused. But as I said, I always found it interesting. Unfortunately, also due to that, sometimes the preparation could have been better. So it was rare that I came very well prepared to lectures. And looking backwards, probably I would have learned more if I'd spent a little more time in preparation. But there were some things which just collided with other activities.
Of course. I think the story of many law students. In terms of, so you mentioned your LL.M. So I understand that you started at Marburg, Geneva, Cologne, then you moved to LSE for your master's and came back to Cologne for your dissertation. Along that journey, at what point did you know that international dispute resolution and commercial law was where you wanted to head as your career?
Was probably after Marburg, I spent a year in Geneva and had the great privilege of being taught conflict of laws there by the late Pierre Lalif. And he was one of the big arbitrators at the time. And I really enjoyed his lecture. And also when he talked about arbitration. And so from there, I went to Cologne and then started to work for Karl-Heinz Böckstiegel, first as a student at his institute in the air and space law field, but then moved to the international business law section there and got hooked to arbitration and wrote my dissertation on arbitration, spent some time at the LL.M with Julian Liu, who also strongly influenced the career in that way. And I always found it a fascinating topic. In addition to all the other parts in international law, the question of party autonomy, how far can you go with party autonomy? How do you limit that? And how do you bring in the additional element of party autonomy in comparison to state court jurisdiction was something I found the most intriguing one. And that's what I always tell my students. It's a fascinating topic, and I liked it basically from the first day I looked into that until today.
Excellent. Do you believe that your journey through different cities, different institutions helped contribute to you wanting to pursue international dispute resolution?
Definitely. I enjoyed Geneva very much. Yeah, I enjoyed the international atmosphere there. The LL.M program was the same. Yeah, having people coming from different jurisdictions, having the same problem, different approaches, and it really broadened your mind. Yeah, having one problem, 10 different approaches, and all of them led to an acceptable result. Yeah, you would consider some better or worse, but in the end, you could understand where they came from, and it showed you also how much you're influenced by your own background to some extent. As a German, you have always this very structured approach, while others, colleagues from, let's say, Latin America, are much more vivid in a way. And it's both ways are convincing, depending who your audience is. So I found that element, an additional element, which made international arbitration so attractive for me.
Of course. And I think it's something that obviously many coaches and many academics are trying to teach, or will try to teach their students across the next 6 months around the different approaches. Moving from law school then to your early career, you mentioned that you went and worked for Professor Dr. Bucerius for a while, and I believe you were a junior lawyer in Cologne as well. Do you have any formative memories of that period of your life?
What are the formative issues of that period of my life? Luckily, I had the chance of working at the university at an institute which just focused on international law, and unlike most university institutes at the time, also had some money from a foundation, which meant that whenever we wanted to organize something, we could organize something. And we had this, a lot of the international activity of the University of Cologne in principle went through that institute, which was a little bit more free in how you could spend the money than you would normally be at a university institute. And there we organized the summer course for the University of California, Davis, their campus in Davis. They had an LL.M program, which you could do through several installments. And one of the American professors who came over was then later on the dean of the Master of Law and Business program at Bucerius, who then brought me to Bucerius. So that's probably one of the formative parts. And I started off with giving two hours at the master program, and then out of the 2, it became 4, 6, 8, and finally I basically have the professorship there. Fortunately, they were also much more flexible in the state university, that they allow me to teach what I want to do and at a reduced number of hours.
It's interesting how life sometimes just charts a course, doesn't it? 2 hours here becomes a professorship later down the line. Staying in Cologne just for a second. So you then moved to taking on the coaching role of the Cologne Vis team, I believe as early as 1997. We have a number of coaches joining our session today, and I have no doubt a number of future coaches that are eagerly listening to us as well. If you think back to that period of, I think, 8 or 9 years that you coached the Cologne team, how did your coaching style evolve during that period?
I started off as a very German coach. So that meant my team was extremely well prepared, but we didn't make the cut. That was the only year we didn't make the cut, which was at the time still 16 teams, because our arguments were just too complicated. So we needed 4 or 5 steps to explain it to the people. And that is something you have to learn, that yes, the argument must be solid, but you must be able to present them in a way that with 3 steps you're there, that you get a chance of presenting them. If it takes longer, you may lose the audience and you may lose too much time. If the audience then, if they want to dig deeper, great. Then you have the chance of really showing the knowledge. And as I said, we focused that time very much on the German, a little bit, I would say, very structured, but also sometime too technical approach. There was no real story around it. And in particular, if you have people, and always have them also at the Vis Moot, who are not too familiar with arbitration, they may be experts in CISG or contract law, and they devote their time to other things, then you must have a story, a convincing story explaining someone why something happens. And that is also something I try to tell everybody. In the end, it's commercial dispute resolution in a way. You should explain why you do something. And also as an arbitrator, if someone insists on formalities for the sake of formalities, that is always something where you say, maybe there's a weak case otherwise. If someone explains me its commercial background, why they insist on certain things, I'm much more willing as an arbitrator to follow them, if the overall story is convincing.
And I imagine that's the key learning that has stuck with you even into your own career then. I mean, you started as the Vis coach whilst you were still a relatively junior lawyer as well. Is there a memory during that period of coaching that you look back on fondly across that period? There
are a lot of memories, I look on fondly, because as a coach also, that's probably the time of the university where you really see students develop. When you see students coming with at the beginning of the case, they have no knowledge about arbitration, no knowledge about the CISG, and some of them are not excellent speakers. At the end of that, you're very often happy that you already have a career, because they have improved so much that it is, at least for someone who likes education, heartwarming, to see what the development is. And so there are a number of things, and it's quite funny when also you see students who you have coached then sit with you jointly at conferences, and you see that they haven't made a career, and then some of them say, okay, that was for me the kind of turning point, when I really understood what law is all about, and I learned so much which is useful for practice, that the theory I had before, I could suddenly now see where I'm heading to. So if you would have more than several hours time, I could go into details there, but I think the overall description there is probably more than sufficient.
I think that's a universal feeling, isn't it? Speaking to many coaches across the way, Vis East and at Vis, it's the growth of the student at the end of the day, rather than necessarily the results, whether or not they've won an honorable mention or they've won the entirety of the Vis. It's often that growth along the way. You finished coaching in 2005, but you were returning back to Vis as an arbitrator, I understand. And you were approached by Professor Bergsten to join as a director. I understand that it was possibly the second or third time that it asked you that you finally agreed to join. What made you join as a director?
I always liked it. And the reason why I said no at the beginning, I was still pursuing a traditional German university career. We had 3 children, and so there was not really any time. When I decided that I would give up at least the traditional German university career and perhaps teach at foreign universities and then enlarge my arbitration practice, which was always running beside the academic part, I thought, okay, they have not waited for you to write another book in German on German law, on whatever, the pledge or anything else, So your contribution to international education is working on that, because I had probably was one of the fewer younger people there who had both the experience from the practical side, as well as considerable teaching experience and academic writing, so that he could combine the both. A lot of the practitioners, they're so immersed into their world that they don't understand how difficult it may be for students, and vice versa. As a academic who has no practical experience in arbitration, I think it's very difficult to understand what problems are out there and to make the problem realistic. That is something which I'm pretty proud of, that a lot of the people come to me after the case and said, where did you get our documents from? That we have cases which are largely the same thing. Was anyone disclosing documents or whatever? And that makes it interesting, and that's why I also later took over. I can tell you, my wife at the time was not extremely convinced about the decision, but that changed after we had been approached standing in a queue in front of a museum in St. Petersburg at the time, and then a young Russian colleague came and said I probably didn't know her, but she wanted to say thank you. For her it was really a life-changing experience. And then when she left, my wife said, okay, forget everything I've said. You do one arbitration less and you do that. That seems to be something which may be more rewarding, and now can understand why you want to do it.
I mean, that life-changing experience, I think the Vis is transformative. You mentioned it yourself around your own students and how they grow. And for me, myself, I didn't have any interest in necessarily practicing law. I was sort of just doing a law degree. And then I did the Vis, and following the Vis, I was like, oh, this is something that I could potentially do in the future. And then it was my Vis coach that actually brought me back to Deakin Law School myself. So definitely a life-changing experiance.
That's exactly what the young Russian colleague said. She said, I was studying law, but I was studying it because I had to study something. And with that, I suddenly saw where it could lead, and also how important it can be who is your advocate. Because I think one of the big things at the Vis Moot is that you see the same problem from both sides. That is something which happens rarely before and rarely thereafter. You're always representing one party. But here you're representing both parties, and you realize that in the majority of cases which are not black and white, it really may make a difference how you present something. And there's always something probably also to the other party's case. And perhaps if you understand that, that leads to a settlement even, where you say, we find a way out there. Sorry to interrupt you there. But
No, definitely. And I think I often have some of my students will come back from Vis and then try to do some domestic moots, or they'll do internal university moots, and they're a little more advanced sometimes than other people that haven't done Vis for those very reasons of they've spent 6 months on a problem and they've seen the problem from both sides. And so the arguments are just more reasonable to the point, as you were mentioning earlier, the 3 steps to get to the point. And I think, and I hope that obviously translates into practice later on. Just quickly, so when you took the role on, did you know how big a role it was at that time? Did you know how many hours it would take? Did you know where it would end up? So this was 2012, and it's obviously grown year on year to almost 400 teams now.
It was already a task at the time, and I was impressed that Eric Bergsten really ran it until then as a largely family business. He himself, his wife, and his daughter, and fortunately Patricia was then the director organizing everything in Vienna. Without her, that wouldn't have been possible. I was shocked when I received the first questions, the first problem I wrote, and when at the time there was no limit on the number of questions you could ask, and I remember there was one Brazilian team who came up with 54 questions, and I thought I must have written an entirely useless problem. But then you realize that probably 80% of the questions are not really to the point. But I always approach the problem with some issues in mind, and you normally focus on that one, and it may well happen that you forget something here, forget something there. And as I said, I'm German trained. I have been working internationally, but I'm still German in a way, and also in the way of thinking. And people coming from a different jurisdiction may have a completely different experience with some of the problems and then come up with points I've entirely overlooked. So 20% of the questions are relevant. Some are planned in a way, because I may sometimes have to rebalance the problem, because, as I said, I had something in mind, forget something else, and then I realize, oh, it's really tilting towards one side. And what I normally do, I ask befriended coaches who are close to their teams, when the questions come in, tell me, is there anything where your coaches or your colleagues or your team members have said, oh, that's a very easy one, for us, and it's an extreme uphill battle for the other side. And in principle, for each of the 4 questions, there's normally a prepared question and answer where you could rebalance it a little bit.
So on that, how do you then strike a balance between making the problem accessible to some of the newer teams who may not have resources, but difficult enough for those teams that Vis is, part of the institution, and make it difficult enough that it's not solvable within the month?
It's always something you're never 100% sure, in a way. I try to have a problem which is difficult at the beginning, but at least, and that's the advantage of having a sales law problem, is approachable. Everyone has heard sales and contract law at the university. Everyone has engaged in these type of contracts. So that is normally the easier part there. The arbitration part, most students have never heard about arbitration before, and most students also have, at the beginning at least, a problem understanding the particularities of arbitration. What I always try to do, have the issues going back to the real foundations of either the CISG or arbitration, and which means that if you want just to deal with the problem, you're able to do it. But if you really want to succeed, you have to get the broader picture. You have to be able to put it somewhere into the general principles of arbitration. And that is what distinguishes the good from the excellent teams. In the end, that they have understood the entire system and are very able to navigate on a question, even unforeseen question. There are few unforeseen questions with the amount of pre-moots most teams have done, but they're always, we have some of the leading arbitrators there, and which have seen cases and come up then with questions you haven't heard before. And there's always a lot of detail in it. Probably you will still find out something until the final reading. That is also the way the case is written. The first draft is, after you have done some research whatsoever, is usually done within a week and a half. But then comes the part where you change a little bit here, you change a little bit there. And the good thing, there's always 2 or 3 mistakes in, which I haven't picked up, which also raise questions. And one of the problems is also that I try to put in more than just the 4 problems. Some are dead ends. You start off with something and then realize, oh, that's not really relevant. And some are minor problems there. And that is also something which is, in my view, crucial to become a successful lawyer. You have to make a choice. Which issues am I presenting? Is that really a strong argument? So the strategic part, in addition to the writing and the legal arguments, is also something which is important. We often get from students or from coaches. They are not too happy that there's too much. You cannot cover that within the time limit or the page limit given for the memoranda, or the time limit for the oral presentation. But that is something you also have to do in practice. Yeah, you have to make a decision. What is the most important part, and where am I strong to convince the tribunal? And also to be flexible. If the tribunal wants to hear something else, just switch to that.
So, putting aside the complexity that the students will have to deal with and the nitty-gritty of the problem, which I'm sure we're not going to get into. And I was mentioning to Professor Kröll ahead of this session that I've got a printed version of the problem here, but I have yet to open it so that I wouldn't mistakenly ask something about the problem. However, I was in multiple discussions today with different Vis coaches who kept giving me little bits and pieces. And so before we lose our audience, who are here to hear about the 33rd Vis problem, I must ask you about what is the behind the scenes of the drafting of this year's problem? When do you commence? You mentioned that it takes about a week and a half roughly for the first draft. When do you turn your mind to drafting the problem?
It's normally beginning of the summer, and there had been years when it always started with collect ideas over the year already. So I have something in mind. And it always started with Professor Petra Butler from New Zealand coming to visit Germany, and she came over for a weekend, and there was the kickoff normally when I discussed with her, ran my problems via her, and said, is there anything you would consider to be too problematic, other things? And that was usually a kind of kickstart. She's now dean and not so frequent anymore in Germany, so that I normally try to start early in the summer with meeting with the institution and asking them, is there anything you have in mind from your rules which you would like to be discussed in the arbitration part? Is there any product you have in mind which is very special for you? Advanced technology from your country, something where you say it may help you also to get other sponsors involved, or something which is just typical for the country, something you're associated with. And from there, I start doing research, in a way, okay, that's the product, and you start reading into the product. And then from there, you say, okay, which of the potential problems you have collected over the years, which have been presented to you by colleagues, would fit very well with the product. And then you start, once you have made up your mind a little bit, you start just writing with the ideas there. And Singapore was very special, because we normally announce at the closing ceremony which rules have been selected by the rules committee, and then their rules are on in 3 years' time. And on Easter Tuesday, I got already an email from SIAC after they had been announced in that year, whether we could talk about the potential case. And I told them, yes, we can talk about the potential case in 2.5 years, but not earlier. So they were very keen on that. And it's now that you have in most institutions people sitting who have participated in the Vis themselves, are very eager doing that, and also understand what is required. So at the early stages, I always got suggestions, very interesting problems, but where very often the institution decided the issue. And we need something which the tribunal has to decide. So, for example, challenge of arbitrators would be a very interesting problem, but it's normally the institution which decides about the challenges, unless if someone listens to that and finds a way how I can make challenge of arbitrators an issue in one of the next year's problems, please contact me. And that also happened this year with Singapore. They came with the entire management the leading people came to last year's Vis, and to take a look. And then we had a meeting already at that time. We're discussing some of the issues which may potentially come up, and then they had the issue with the new rules where they said we have this provision on third-party funding, which was added, and whether we could do anything around that. They had a number of other proposals, and since third-party funding has evolved considerably since the last time we had it in the mood, I think it was a very good suggestion. So trying to build something around that.
And this is a question without notice, but do you feel like, and this is something that I've always felt like, but I'd like to get your thoughts on how the Vis problem shapes the publications that are to follow in the next 12 months, particularly from junior lawyers, junior practitioners, or law students. Do you feel like that sometimes you're helping shape where academia is going in this area from a different, wearing a different hat in a different capacity?
I wouldn't say I'm shaping academia, but there's a lot of publications thereafter following. And sometimes I'm a little bit sad to some extent, that I cannot publish what I've read all there, because if I would publish something, people would say, okay, that's the solution, and probably a lot of the publication of the other colleagues are much better, and also eye-opening for me. I sometimes see people coming to me and suggesting writing their PhD actually on something they have done during WIS. They have researched that so much and came up with issues which probably I haven't had in mind, and then want to write their PhD about that. There's definitely a discussion about it, and that is something where I really want to encourage the students as well. We are now trying to make use of the incredible data which the Vis could provide on certain views of students, the next generation of arbitrators, how certain things should develop. And we will approach all students with a survey, in principle 3 times during the course of the Vis year, to learn how they see the problems, the solution of the problem, how that may be influenced by the role they have been playing, and how perhaps advocacy, and that is more how to the arbitrators, how the advocacy influences the outcome of the case. So I strongly encourage you really to participate individually in this survey, and also just come up with the answers you have in mind. So there's nothing behind it but us trying to get information how the next generation sees, for example, should revised rules be applied when the parties have agreed at a time when the rules were not revised. So that is just, it's very difficult to find empirical data in arbitration. And here we have something, at least the next generation. And it's very interesting for educational purpose. And we also look at AI. You probably remember that the last 2 years we had exercises with AI, and we are constantly trying to look into that and see how it will change the mood, how we may perhaps improve the learning experience for the students, but at the same time try to make sure that the students learn something beyond just prompting AI. And I can tell you, last year I made an effort to have the arbitrator's brief drafted by AI, and I thought I was pretty clever, using the last 3 years with the arbitrator's brief, and then putting in always also the arbitrator's brief from CISG. They have the CISG Cup, which is normally taking place already in December, and the CISG Cup arbitrator's brief differs often in certain respects from the one we draft. It was an entire nightmare. After 2 days, I largely gave up, and decided to do it the old style, write it myself. But that is something which takes place behind the scenes, and when you hear from people, you have to allow AI, we are sure that we have to allow AI to some extent, On the other hand, proper use of AI requires that you understand at least how the answer should look like, and don't trust entirely in AI, because there is still the problem with hallucinations. There is a problem with they want to please you in a way, and they miss out on important details of the case.
Keeping on that topic, and there's a question I was going to ask you later in the session, but I might, as you've brought up AI, I might just stick to it. So with the generally global adoption of technology post-COVID and the rapid and significant rise of AI, do you foresee any major changes to how the Vis will run, or how the Vis problem will run, noting the hallucinations, noting that there are practitioners out there that some use it better than others? There are multiple courts around the world that are commenting on the use of AI, and I know in Melbourne, in Victoria, there's been multiple instances that have gone to our bar for disciplinary action as well. So with all of that in mind, how do you see AI interacting with Vis in the future?
It's one of the most difficult questions we have. And every year after the Vis, we sit together and look at the developments which have taken place, and also what it will mean for us. First of all, we are an educational venture primarily. So you have to acknowledge AI is there, and students have to learn how to use it. So therefore, we have this cautious approach of allowing AI to some extent correcting what you have written. On the other hand, we have largely banned AI from writing something, because as a student, you take much more out of it if you do it yourself. And if you start off with AI, you're already heading towards one direction. So we try to control it. It's difficult to control, because once you have written something in your mother tongue, then using AI, then have it translated. It may be very difficult for programs to detect that. We offer the students an opportunity that they can learn a lot. What they make out of that is outside of our hands. I'm sure that we will have students which rely more on AI than we want them to. And I'm sure that we have students, and probably they benefit much more, which really start the traditional way, writing the first draft of the brief themselves, and then perhaps use AI to help them, or use AI for research purposes, but limit it to that. You acquire, or let's put it differently, this is an opportunity to acquire skills which you may not acquire during your other studies. How to write a good submission, how to make it short, how to concentrate on certain things. If you just throw away that opportunity, we cannot prevent you from doing that. And for us, we will have to keep on looking at that. But I'm pretty sure that the written phase, we may have to find different solution. Perhaps at one point in time, that's what we are looking into at Bucerius Law School. Whenever you submit something, you have to provide a hyperlink. That means if AI provides it, you have to check everything and make it a hyperlink. I don't know how long the brief then will be and how much time it takes, but that is something the future will show, and I would be surprised if everything stays as it is now.
Yeah, I think the rapid development in this area suggests that it won't stay still. Just a final point on that, or a final question. So obviously from the organizer's point of view, you are thinking about AI, but what part, and you've just mentioned that the students will gain a lot more if they are to engage with the problem and not use AI to a high degree. What part do the coaches play in this as well, in guiding the students along the path to proper use of AI?
You probably see that we hand out a certificate for coaching. And everyone who has coached knows that the important role coaches play. First of all, in getting the students interested, then guiding them through the process. And I think it will also be the coaches who, to some extent, are in a much better position to monitor the use of AI than we, because they're close to that. Yeah? So the coaches are, for us, a very important part of the Vis, and they play an incredibly important role. And also, whenever a team comes up, winning team, whatever, we also congratulate the coaches, because to some extent, it's also their success. As I said, for us, and I'm now speaking as one of the directors, not as a former coach, for us, the educational side is the most important one. As a coach, it was very much about also winning, having a good standing for the university. And we can also understand that. If the dean of, let's say, Deakin Law School sends a team of 4 people, 6, 7 people to Europe and sponsors that, he or she is not willing just to sponsor a good time, but they also are responsible for the reputation of the university, whatever. So if you come back with a prize, in particular for the smaller universities, that is a very important achievement. And if you can place some of your former Mooties in top law schools, it helps, and it also helps later on the next generation. We have a number of universities where, for example, from Caesarean Methodist, they have placed their top students in big law firms, and they fund the teams to some extent. They come back for coaching, and I know that happens to a lot of other teams. And also Africa in the Mood is one of the ventures which really makes me proud of being involved in the Vis Moot, and also am taken over that role, that former coaches, former participants really give back to the next generation in education and coach. And I think it also helps you coaching, because it's always a very delicate balance between, on the one hand, never being happy with the result you have, pushing the team to the next level without frustrating them.
It's always a tightrope that you sort of tread along, and the balancing act between always wanting them to go that one step further, but not tipping them over the edge. If you had one piece of advice that you could give to all students, any student around the world, whether they're completely new to mooting or not, to maximize their learning and growth from this Vis experience, what would that one piece of advice be?
In principle, 2 things. Work hard and enjoy it. Don't give up too easy. It may be frustrating. And you may realize, in particular, if procedural number 2 comes out, okay, he killed our main argument with that. But in the end, the rewarding part is really the final part, when all the small bits and pieces you have learned suddenly make a broad picture. You understand the structure, and it's not individual problems, but you have the idea, I understand it. And also the oral part, the pre-moot part, is incredibly important, because you learn something there which we didn't have, at least in civil law universities in Europe, the presentation skills. And sometimes in my team, often the people who were the strongest legally were not the strongest speakers. So other people who had just found a way of avoiding the problems, but presenting them very convincingly, won the best speaker award, where we were surprised, when we knew that they were, in our view, members of the team which were much stronger. So don't get frustrated. Everyone has gone through that. And when you listen to the Vis Moot song, the Moody Blues, it's well described in there, that you have the ups and downs, but I would say with a very large majority at the end of the journey, you have much more ups than you have downs. So hard work, remain persistent, and hope for a good end.
It's very sage advice, very sage advice. In terms of advice for organizations such as Africa in the Moot, so obviously this session's been run by Africa in the Moot, but there are a number of newer organizations all across the world in different regions that are trying to support teams from underrepresented or emerging nations and regions. What advice do you give those organizations and the volunteers from there as they're attempting to champion teams from those nations?
First of all, probably cannot give you any advice. Yeah, in particular to Africa and the Moot, you have achieved so much. Yeah, we have tried since we took over. We have supported various initiatives, and then it didn't work out. But with Africa and the Moot, it worked out. Yeah, you were there at the right time. One thing which I would always advise people, don't be afraid of criticism. There will be always people criticizing it. And I remember when Africa and the Moot came up and I was very much supporting it, people came to me and said, how can you do that? Yeah, these are largely people from Europe trying to basically develop arbitration in Africa. That is, again, the colonialism issue. In the end, I'm just looking at the result. And the result of Africa and the Moot is great, that you have now 20 teams participating. And I'm pretty sure that within 10 years' time, the majority of the coaches will be former Vis students from Africa. You have developed that. And that also applies to other regions. I found it very good that they were largely former Vis coaches, which have an interest there. And just mentioned Steve Fleischer, who lives in Kenya now, who has been participated in the Vis, with the American team, got a lot of Americans in. And I think the more you merge those different cultures, the more you benefit from that. And it's... to some extent also, again, you need the persistence. Don't give up. You may have teams which are not coming back, where the funding is not coming, but in the long run, you will find someone who persistently supports you. And with a growing Moot community, people who have done it, and you will have more and more people supporting it. And there are a number of excellent programs around. Africa and the Moot. We have the Moot Court Bar in Sri Lanka. We have CLDP, the Commercial Development Program, which is supporting a lot of teams. And we also try, in Germany to get funders for various events. Taking them or telling them always, that is money invested really in the future, and the return is extremely high, because a lot of the people who are through that later on will work for little or no money whatsoever and keep it going.
I think that the investment piece is so important when we're getting that messaging out. And the other organization, thank you for your kind words for Africa in the Moot, but I think there are also other organizations out there that are also coming up, like you said, Moot Court Bench, Vizards, a few to mention there as well that are also doing some great work. We'll quickly pivot back to yourself. Everything that you've mentioned suggests that you are a very, very busy man. You've had and continue to have quite the remarkable career. I suppose the simple question is, how do you do it?
I was probably just lucky in a way that I have lucky and privileged to some extent. I love the work I do. I have all the support I can get from also the family, which has no problems or has few problems in me working long hours. I have had no major health issues so far, but I think the most important part is you must enjoy what you do, and then there is working 14 hours a day is easier than spending 9 hours basically doing nothing. And when people ask me, what did you learn in your military service? I can always tell them the worst is having 9 hours to do nothing. It's an awful long day. And even for that, to see the privilege to study and to do the work you love to do is something which probably then also drives you. And that's what I also told my children. Whatever you do, you select whatever you want to do, and just enjoy it, and then you will be successful.
So just highlighting this 14-hour days of yours, Professor Kröll, what does, and I doubt there have been 2 days that have looked alike for you in many years, but what is a typical day, as typical as it can be in your life?
What's a typical day? I probably get up before 7. Then I do interesting work, meet interesting people, try to squeeze in half an hour of sports at least on average, and then go to bed around midnight. And then always are grateful about the interesting work I have done and all the opportunities I have. So that is the normal day. And when you ask me what an ideal day would look like, there is just one thing is it could have more than 24 hours to squeeze in all the interesting things I have to decline and which are there. And I also feel always very sorry when people approach me for PhD theses or whatever. You have to decline. I would like to go to every pre-moot, to come to Africa, to Nairobi, to go to the other pre-moots, but there's a limit to everything. And but there is something where I would say I was just lucky. Let's put that, we're lucky and privileged.
I think there's obviously hard work and talent and all those things behind it as well. So I think you're being somewhat humble as well there, Professor Kröll. But I think it's always nice to hear from someone who's at the stage of a career as you are, so widely respected, to also acknowledge that there was some luck and there was some privilege involved there as well. Just quickly going back to something that you said that you enjoy the Vis Moot, and we very quickly, briefly mentioned your flirtation with science towards the end of your high school days. And I mentioned that those of us that have read Vis problems or been involved in Vis for some time notice that there is scientific elements to your problems. Do you have a topic or a year that you enjoyed more than others learning about that particular topic?
It was actually the COVID year, when we had the vaccine. And why was that so? First of all, suddenly we had all the children back home because at university, everything was closed. And my oldest daughter studies molecular biotechnology, and that's actually what she does. So in the end, she explained details to me, and I learned so much about vaccines, that probably you could have used me as an expert in these cases. And additionally, our youngest one had a close friend, and her father was working for one of the producers, the contract producers. So we had very nice evening during COVID times. The two of us explaining me the scientific side and the business side of developing the vaccine. And it was just really nice. You learn so much yourself. Also the other ones. When I started with orchids this year, I didn't know that vanilla is made from orchids. And reading through that, you will realize some of the names have to do with people making developments there, and there's a lot in there. Though it was this year the first time I really had to invent something. Therefore, you have the clarification there that the product I invented doesn't exist. But for educational purposes, we had to make some changes. So the flowering dates don't fit. You don't have to look it up somewhere. You can create perhaps one. Perhaps the Singapore Botanical Garden is not only creating one for the Singapore Mediation Convention, but perhaps also for the Vis. But probably it was the COVID part which I found the most interesting, and we were really close to reality. And there were a number of cases coming thereafter, where which were largely the Vis case, which is a pity that the only one which would have landed with me, I had to decline because I was head of the German Arbitration Institute at the time, and had at the time a rule that you're not allowed to take any, not even as a chairman, any of the cases under the DS rules, even if the parties want you to take the case.
That would have been a very interesting case. So how unfortunate that your own rules prevented you.
I still regret that, but okay.
Okay. I think we've learned a lot about your life so far, and the drafting of the Vis problem, and your involvement in the Vis. One question which I think you've sort of touched on, but there might be people watching this that will be drafting their own moot problems, whether it's for the universities or for the regions, etc., potentially external competitions. Do you have any advice for them as to how to go about it, whether it's at a small level and it's a 4-page problem, or it's the Vis problem, which is 60 pages long?
Probably again, a lot of them, and I've seen a lot of other problems are so well thought through that I probably cannot give them any real advice. So for me, it's always an issue of try to find something which perhaps goes beyond what you really treat there. So we have seen that we had a number of controversial products, palm oil, for example. And then perhaps also that helps people to understand that also to palm oil, there are usually two sides to the coin. Palm oil has a very bad reputation in Europe. When I was talking to the Malaysian producers, or the Asian producers, they said, to be honest, if you pay more, we fulfill all the obligations you have. And when you look at the soil you use for basically producing oil with different crops, you use much more space than we use for palm oil. So it's really something where you think a little bit about beyond that. Apart from that, very difficult to say what advice I can give there. You learn over the years, in one way or another. You've seen, do it more than once. That would be my advice. Then you see how you improve and how much more confident you become. When questions come up, and also be aware that whatever you had in mind, the students or participants may have something entirely different in mind. When they read through it.
We're going to turn to some rapid fire questions. In the meantime, if you are watching this live, feel free to start to ask some questions for Professor Kröll in the comments section, and we will go through them and ask as many as we can in the time that's remaining. So Professor Kröll, rapid fire questions, essentially no thinking. First answer that comes to you, most in the yes/no style of questions. And hopefully it will give our viewers, the Vis students, coaches, Vis supporters, a further insight into Professor Kröll. So, first question, Tea or coffee?
Coffee.
How do you drink your coffee?
Cappuccino.
Sunrise or sunset?
Sunrise.
Reading a novel or watching a movie?
Reading a novel.
Do you have a favorite author or a favorite novel? That's
Charles Dickens.
If you had a 2-course meal, do you prefer entree and main or main and dessert?
Entree and main.
And do you have a favorite entree?
Favorite entree. I like, there's so many of them. Carpaccio.
Carpaccio. Okay. Summer or winter?
Both.
Okay. World Cup final, penalty shootout. Would you rather be the goalkeeper or the person taking the deciding penalty kick?
Goalkeeper.
Okay. And same scenario, would you rather have prime Oliver Kahn in goals or 1990 Andreas Braber taking the penalty kick?
Oliver Kahn.
Did you play soccer? Were you goalkeeper?
I played soccer and I was also a time a goalkeeper, but primarily I played in the midfield.
Okay. Apple or Android?
Android.
Travel within Europe, train or plane?
Train.
And procedure or merits?
Procedure.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you for those rapid fire questions, Professor Kröll. We are starting to get some questions coming through in the chat. This is the first time I'm reading results, so I'll read them out to you. We've got a question. What, according to you, Professor, are the fundamentals of CISG and the rules of arbitration, the rules which you need to understand the system or the bigger picture?
Excellent question. Arbitration, it's always party autonomy, and how do you balance it? How do you balance it with the restrictions imposed either by the institution or by the local law? In the CISG, there is also largely party autonomy. Then you have some of the fundamental principles, and it's very often about interpretation. So Article 8, Article 9, and it's a very well devised, probably very German structure, when you look where the CISG comes from, so that the first draft was largely a draft prepared early in the history by Ernst Rabel. You still see that in the structure of the CISG.
Okay, thank you to Joe for that question. There's a question off the back of that from Connor. Off the back of that question, how much does oral advocacy influence the bigger picture? Is it something that firms consider in your experience?
It definitely does. Yeah, I can only now talk about my own experience as an arbitrator. Yeah, that it makes a considerable difference, even if you have read the entire file, how that is presented to you in the oral hearing. So the opening statements at the beginning, I was not a big fan of them because I had the impression you have read everything. It's a waste of time. But now hearing it once more, putting it together in a story here is very helpful. And I think that also a lot of the firms realize that having a good advocate is really an asset. And I always tell that to my students when I have a moot court and then criticize them, that some of the magic circle firms still hire a barrister to present their case in difficult cases. So there is a reason for that. It's not that these people in the magic circle firms don't know how to do it, but it's just the 1 inch which is perhaps the barrister through his training is a little bit better on that one, that you then try to rely on one of those. In getting job offers, I think you must be good on the law anyway. Yeah. And if you're then also convincing as a advocate or presenter, it definitely increases your chances.
Okay. From Peter, we have a question. How would you recommend, and I mean, this is very, very, it's very much on topic for everyone. How would you recommend research issues which are often ambiguous, even for experienced practitioners themselves, particularly within procedural law?
I would just start reading somewhere, yeah, and take one of the, and then go from there, and make up your mind. What are the underlying interests? What are why are certain rules as they are? And then juxtapose them and then go from there onwards. It's difficult, to give an advice on such a very broad topic, but I think the general issue is you have to start. Yeah, the first step may always be the most difficult one. Yeah, but once you have learned a little bit, you see more. You see that also when you write a PhD. I always tell my PhD students, after you've finalized your PhD, take another 3 months to read through it again. You will weed out so much things which at the beginning seemed very important to you, but now with all the knowledge you have, you see their banalities, and if you take them out, you save 100 pages, and it makes a much better reading, at least for those who understand the topic.
I think there's always that as well, isn't it? Those that understand the topic, whether it's in written submissions or oral submissions sometimes. We have a question from Shiv. Professor, within the moot, when it comes to the memorandums, would you say a more creative story like memo is more effective compared to straight, no-nonsense memos?
Depends on who reads it. I'm personally more a no-nonsense memo type, and but there are other people who like the more creative story better. At least it must be a story which is convincing. Creative and not convincing is something I would not advise. And so the no nonsense is probably the safer side. But if you are creative and manage to convince, that's probably more effective then. If you come up with something. So one of the teams which is usually doing quite well is Ottawa. And Ottawa always comes up with a very interesting story, very succinct summary, whatever. And it works very often, but there are years where it doesn't work.
I think this is, just to add to that comment, the difference between Vis and real practice, where in practice you know your arbitrators and you know their style, you've done the research there. In the written memo phase particularly, you have no idea who is going to be reading it. And so the safer option is often the better option. Whereas in the oral rounds, I often see students, scrambling to find who the arbitrators are, especially when someone's been changed at the last minute to work out who it is that's sitting in that chair.
We try our best, to have the arbitrators scheduled well in advance. Then you realize that people have signed up months before, and then something more urgent comes up. They cancel. So in the last week, we normally have around 200 cancellations. And you know what that does to our schedule. And it's Chris and Birgit, who then spend hours trying to find someone. And most of you who participate or have participated in the opening ceremony see members of the Vis organizing committee running around trying to arrest potential arbitrators for holds we still have. And also, if you're a younger arbitrator and you don't get an assignment months ahead, we can understand that it is normally important for you to plan ahead. But we try, in principle, everyone who is in Vienna, we try to give them at least 1 or 2 slots, and there's always a lot of slots which are available last moment.
Just on that, this isn't a comment or a question from the chat, but from my own self. We often speak about the Vis as the Olympics of law school. And the Olympics is a logistical, it's a challenge. When you think about the Olympics, like Brisbane has the 2032 Olympics, they started planning for it years ago, sort of thing. You do this year after year, you bring 400 law schools and 2,000 plus practitioners and students. As the Vis continues to grow, what are your thoughts? Where to from here? Because this is very popular. Obviously, more teams. Africa in the Moot is trying to participate more. This is similar across many regions across the world. Yeah. So, from that perspective,
we have by now already a limit at the opening ceremony, where we can only pack 2,500 into the room. Then we have rented the next room there as well, where you have transmitted. While we would love everyone to sit in the spectacular concert house hall there, we cannot do that. For the final banquet, we can go up to roughly 430 teams, and then we have to think again what happens. But until that time, we are happy about everyone who comes, and what we see, I would say, probably 50% of the people only who work on the case. You have a lot of the Indian law schools, they have a kind of internal competition already who is allowed to represent the law school, because they're sending smaller teams, and to get into the teams, you have to compete with 150 people. SIAC has the SIAC Cup, with 100 Chinese universities. Out of those, perhaps 30, 40 are participating in the Vis East or in the Vis, and the rest is participating locally. We have the Asian International Arbitration Center runs a parallel to their pre-moot, a parallel moot for locals. For us, it's there for educational purposes. And the more people learn with it, the more people see the benefits of the CISG, of harmonization, the more people see the benefits of arbitration, the better. And also, we often get then requests from groups who want to use it for training purposes, and as long as it's acknowledged where it comes from, and we are not associated with something we don't like to be associated with, we always grant the permission if it's for free.
Well, Professor Kröll, I don't think there's any further questions, but I think on that note of the amazing work that the rest of the organizers do in educating the future generation of arbitrators and lawyers and private international lawyers, we thank you immensely. It's been an enjoyable hour and a half for me. It is now coming up on 1:30 a.m. for me, but I feel wide awake and I could continue speaking to you for many hours.
You do that in Vienna then, yeah?
Oh, of course. I look forward to catching up with you in Vienna. I'll just quickly highlight that this is the first session in our education series. We have a number of programs coming up, so please follow us on the social medias, so LinkedIn, Instagram, and I believe we have TikTok. I myself am not on TikTok, but please do follow us on all of our socials. We obviously have the East Africa Pre-Moot coming up in February, so 17th to the 21st of February in Nairobi in Kenya. Please reach out to us again through the socials if you are interested in coming or bringing your teams to Nairobi. And as Erin mentioned at the start of this call, there are multiple ways in which you can contribute to and support the work of Africa in the Moot. And again, please reach out via the socials to see how you can get involved and help support the educational growth of some exceptional students across the African continent. Professor Kröll, once again, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.